but because your mum is already a robot. Chief among these entities would be hyperobjects with which we're intimate. The water content of the atmosphere has gone up 5% since 1960. Not much, but enough to make the weather very uncanny. And global warming is an object on whose inside we find ourselves, like in the story of Jonah and the whale. Vast cosmological hyperobjects, such as black holes, are so distant and exotic, and so instantly fatal to anything like a life form. Close to them you or I would cease to exist. And they are shielded from Earth by a glass-like screen of the atmosphere. Jane Taylor's poem The Star is all about the atmosphere, in which stars are not cold and dead, as in outer space, but twinkle, twinkle. Now, when the atmosphere ceases to be a glass-like screen and starts to threaten us, it's as if the glass in front of a painting in an art gallery has started to attack us with radiation, shooting out beams of ultraviolet onto our sensitive skin. Our experience becomes one of disgust and pain, default modes of the aesthetic that art normally displaces. So art about hyperobjects must trade in this disgust and pain. It's here that I must mention J. Lyot's work. J. Lyot is a composer who makes sonic hyperobjects. On J. Lyot's webpage there are some found art pieces, some of which are recordings of hydrogen bomb tests in the Pacific. To hear this cataclysmic sound without the minimal protection of the distance afforded by a small movie image of an exploding bomb, an image for which no sound is given, as if the event has taken place too far away to hear, well, devastating is one word for the experience of hearing the bomb. I'm still too frightened to play it to you, having tried to listen to the Bravo test on headphones a few weeks ago in the dark of night. Pieces like this force us to get a close look at gigantic objects whose shadow looms into our world everywhere. In so doing, they tell us about what the universe is made of. The universe is made of objects. What are they? Let's think about them a little more. In the following sections, I'm going to explore the emerging philosophical movement called object-oriented ontology, which I think arrived on the scene just in time for the ecological emergency. Objects are what constitute reality. Objects are unique. Objects can't be reduced to smaller objects or dissolved upwards into larger ones. Objects are withdrawn from one another and from themselves. Objects are TARDIS-like, larger on the inside than they are on the outside. Objects are uncanny. Objects comprise an untotalizable, non-whole, not-all set that defies holism and reductionism. There is thus no top object that gives objects value and meaning, and no bottom object to which they can be reduced. If there is no top object and no bottom object, it means that what we have is a very strange situation in which there are more parts than there are wholes. This is what Levi Bryant calls the strange mereology of objects. Objects are like Doctor Who's TARDIS, bigger on the inside than they are on the outside. This makes holism of any kind impossible. This really means what it says, folks, so now we'll get on to explore how, even if you bracket off a vast amount of reality, you will find that there is no top and bottom object in the small section you've demarcated. Yes, that's right. Even if you select only a sector of reality to study, like they do in ecological science, the mesocosm, you will also find no top or bottom object, even as pertains to that sector alone. There are not even quasi-top and quasi-bottom objects then. It's a bit like a magnet. If you cut it, the two halves still have a north and a south pole. There's no such thing as half a magnet versus a whole one. So why is holism such a bad idea? Surely there could be other possible holisms that adopt some version of both and thinking so that neither the parts nor the whole, whatever the whole might be, are greater. Perhaps the parts are not necessarily lesser than the whole, but exist in some both and synergistic fashion. You could have simultaneously withdrawn objects and something else just to satisfy the modern need for things that aren't static, let's say an open-ended, perhaps always expanding something else. First, some semi-related points about this line of questioning. It sounds like good value to have both and, rather than either or, to our somewhat consumerist mind, buy one, get one free, but I'm afraid this is a case of either or, holism or not. As for the open-ended something else, for object-oriented ontology, this is just another object. Or it doesn't exist as an appearance, or it doesn't exist except as an appearance for another object. Let me explain. But first, in another sense, the part-whole model object-oriented ontology deals with is indeed a kind of both and. This is the sense in which the parts are not replaceable components of the whole. The more we open up the Russian doll of an object, the more objects we find inside. Far more than the first object in the series, because all the relations between the objects and within them also count as objects. It's what Lacanians call a not-all set. Objects in this sense are fundamentally not subject to phallogocentric rule. Yay! Commercial break. If you're having trouble with the word object at this point, why not try another term such as entity? What we're dealing with in object-oriented ontology is a Badiou-like set theory in which any number of affiliations between objects can be drawn. Strictly, the contents of these sorts of set are bigger than the container. This affects a political theory of objects, as I hope to show. I often find children's books come to the rescue for explaining objects, so meet A House is a House for Me.